The iron is cold against the scalp. It is not a comb, but a weapon, a spearhead, the celibata hasta, reportedly pulled from the body of a fallen gladiator. In the dim light of a Roman domus, c. 1st century AD, this is not an act of war, but a necessary preparation for the Roman wedding night ritual. The bride does not weep. The law forbids it. She sits frozen as the iron parts her hair into 6 distinct locks, severing her connection to the gods of her childhood. This is the first violation. Before the guests arrive, before the cry of "Talasio" echoes in the streets, the state mandates this precise, ritualized erasure. A specific motif watches from the corner, a torch made of white thorn, the spina alba. It is meant to ward off evil, but tonight it signals that the protection of her father's house is gone. Records suggest that for the elite, this night wasn't about union, but transfer, a transaction where the cost was absolute. We ask 2 questions. Why did the empire require the bride to simulate capture and terror? And what piece of her identity was required to be destroyed before the door was ever bolted? The iron leaves a mark that no veil can truly hide. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The sun dies and the chaos begins. The deductio is not a celebration. It is a riot sanctioned by the state. By custom, the bride is violently torn from her mother's arms, a staged abduction mimicking the ancient theft of the Sabine women. The mob surrounds her, a wall of shouting faces and flickering torchlight. They chant obscene Fescennine verses, crude insults designed to humiliate her, enough to confuse the envious spirits. The noise is physical, a pressure that forbids thought. She is no longer a daughter with a name. She is a vessel being transported. The procession moves through the winding streets, and with every step away from her father's door, her legal status dissolves. The crowd cheers for the union, but the bride hears only the cage locking. The procession halts. The noise cuts out, replaced by the heavy silence of the groom's threshold. The conditions change immediately. The chaos of the street is forbidden here. She stands before the doorposts, which she must now anoint. She is handed the fat of a wolf and strips of unwashed wool. The law demands she grease the entrance, binding herself to the stone with the scent of a predator. Her hand stops inches from the wood, the wolf fat glistening on her fingertips, her breath held in her throat for a single rebellious heartbeat. She completes the motion, but the hesitation remains recorded in her muscle memory. A final test appears. She is offered fire and water. The aquae et ignis communicatio. It looks like a welcome, a mercy of basic survival, but the price is absolute. Accepting these elements signifies the legal death of her previous family line. She takes them, and the trap snaps shut. She is not allowed to walk in. To trip on the threshold would curse the house forever. She is lifted, carried over the line like a corpse or a spoil of war. The white thorn torch is tossed away behind her, leaving her in the shadow of the atrium. The outside world is gone. The threshold is not a step forward, but a drop into the abyss. The door to the cubiculum shuts, cutting off the last draft of air from the atrium. The room is small, windowless, and smells of stale verbena and the lamp oil that will soon be extinguished. Here, the final layer of the state's apparatus comes into play. The pronuba. She is a matron married only once, a living standard of perfection, and she is not here to comfort the bride. She is here to enforce the transition. She steers the bride toward the lectus genialis, the marriage bed, which looms in the center of the room like a sacrificial altar piled high with flowers. The beauty of the petals is a distraction. The structure underneath is hard wood, an obligation. The bride sits. The pronuba begins to remove the outer layers of the wedding attire, stripping away the public costume to reveal the vulnerable reality beneath. There is no conversation. This is a procedure. The older woman's hands are efficient, cold, and heavy. She whispers instructions on submission, framing the coming violation as a civic duty. The bride is told that her fear is an insult to her new family, that her body is the soil in which the groom's legacy will be planted. The pressure escalates. It is not just physical nudity being demanded, but a spiritual hollowing. The Roman state does not want a partner for its citizen. It wants a vessel. The why that has haunted the night is finally laid bare. The empire cannot tolerate divided loyalties. For the paterfamilias to have absolute power, the wife's connection to her past self must be severed so completely that it can never be retied. The price is not her body, it is her memory of autonomy. The groom enters, the pronuba leaves. The silence that follows is heavier than the shouting of the mob. He approaches to untie the nodus herculeus, the complicated knot binding her belt. It is the final lock. He fumbles with the wool, his breath smelling of the wine consumed at the feast. She watches his hands. Then, a single fracture in the ritual. Her hand shoots out and covers the knot, her fingers rigid against his wrist. It is a hesitation, a reflex of the girl who existed this morning. The groom pauses, looking at her, waiting for the apology that the law expects. It does not come. She realizes that the terror was designed to make her beg for the end of the night, to make her grateful for the peace of submission. By understanding the game, she breaks its power. The fear hardens into something cold and metallic, a discipline usually reserved for soldiers on the frontier. She is not a victim. She is a survivor, enduring a siege. She removes her hand from his wrist, not in surrender, but in dismissal of his authority over her fear. When he asks if she is ready to perform her duty, she delivers the only verdict she has left. I am here. That is enough. She stares past him, at the wall. The silence is no longer a void. It is a fortress she has built, and he cannot enter it. What looks like compliance is actually the first stone of a secret wall. Decades pass. The bride has become the Matrona, a figure of stone and authority draped in the heavy folds of the stola. She moves through the domus with the rhythmic step of a jailer, not a prisoner. The household fears her, not the husband. We assumed in Act 1 that the ritual of the spear and the threshold successfully erased her past, creating a compliant vessel for the husband's line. But evidence from domestic excavations, specifically recovered defixio, curse tablets, found buried beneath the floors of respectable villas, suggests the opposite. The ritual didn't destroy her will. It drove it underground where it grew impervious to the sun. She waits for the house to sleep. In the dead of night, she approaches the lararium, the family shrine. To the public eye, she is arranging offerings for her husband's ancestors, but her hands perform a different wordless rite. She reaches behind the wax masks of the imagines, into a hollow space in the wall. She retrieves a small dried remnant of spina alba, the white thorn from her wedding night. It is not a souvenir of love. It is a tally mark of survival. She touches the thorn to her forehead, closing her eyes. She mouths the names of her own father, her own gods, the lineage the state legally murdered. The silence is not empty. It is a weapon waiting to be drawn. The revelation is terrifying in its quietness. The Roman wedding did not conquer the woman. It created a sleeper agent inside every aristocratic house. The virtuous silence, praised by historians like Livy, was actually a conspiracy of exclusion. The wives maintained a parallel culture, a hidden network of influence and memory that the husbands were too arrogant to see. The price paid wasn't her identity. The price was the husband's reality. He lives a lie, believing he is the master, while she controls the bloodline, the alliances, and the secrets. She teaches this subversion to her daughters, not with words, but with the pressure of her hand during the braiding of the hair. The iron spear parts the locks, and the legacy of resistance is passed down, invisible to the men standing right beside them. The root grows deepest where the light cannot reach. The domus is now a skeleton of brick and weed. The roof collapsed centuries ago, exposing the cubiculum to the indifference of the rain. The wax masks of the ancestors have melted into unrecognizable lumps of resin. The ledgers that recorded the dowry, the wolf fat, and the legal transfer of the bride have rotted away. The Roman state, which seems so eternal and heavy in Act 1, has evaporated. What remains is silence. In a museum case, thousands of miles from the ruin, the iron spearhead, the celibata hasta, sits on a velvet mount. The placard describes it as a cosmetic tool or a quaint ceremonial object. Visitors glance at it and see a hair accessory. They do not see the weapon that parted the hair like a scalp wound. They do not hear the silence of the bride who sat beneath it. The true history of that night has been erased, smoothed over by the comfort of time and the laziness of translation. The terror has been scrubbed out, leaving only the aesthetic of the marble statues. But the echo remains if you listen to the architecture. The threshold of the villa is worn down, not just by the feet of the masters, but by the dragging weight of the women who crossed it and never returned. The spina alba still grows wild in the cracks of the foundation, thorny and resilient, outliving the empire that tried to cultivate it. We began by asking what was destroyed. We thought it was the woman, but looking at the ruins, we see that the woman's silence outlasted the husband's shout. The ritual didn't break the line. It forced it to mutate into something harder, something that could survive the collapse of the world. The iron spear did not kill the girl, it forged the matriarch. The silence was not emptiness, it was the only victory available. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. The stone remembers what the history books forgot.